Hello, I'm Kim Landers and we're continuing our coverage on ABC News 24 of this breaking news throughout the afternoon. In a moment we'll look back on the life of the leader of Al-Qaeda. But first, to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Brendon O'Connor, who's an Associate Professor of American Politics at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Brendon O'Connor, this is news that US leaders have been waiting for a long time to announce.
It was something that Barack Obama promised that he'd achieve as president. On the campaign trail in 2008, he said that he would bring Osama Bin Laden to justice, i.e. kill him, I think was basically what he was getting at there. And this is something he's achieved. So he'll probably be able to sort of look back on it and say, I'm the president that was able to do what George W. Bush wasn't able to do.
Because for a long time, the United States had the embarrassing situation. We saw heads of the CIA, the Defence Secretary, even presidents, even George W. Bush having to concede that they really didn't have a clue about where he was.
And he'd become such a big figure in the American imagination on the war on terror. In some ways he'd become a more marginal figure in the actual fighting and the conduct of the war on terror as it was going on in Afghanistan and on the border of Pakistan. But in the American imagination he was the number one figure. As you said, he was associated with the September 11 attacks. He was the one who directed them from the top. So it will be very significant news, very important for the Americans.
Well, certainly over the past decade, there were times when people felt that perhaps the hunt for Osama Bin Laden had been given a much lower priority as the US went into places like Afghanistan, went into places like Iraq, all of the debate over those two conflicts. And some people used to say, but what about Osama Bin Laden? Where is he?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, it will lead to this question of, well, why should America stay in Afghanistan? I mean, was Bin Laden and taking out Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is a much weaker organisation than it was in 2001, has this now been achieved? And can this allow the US to withdraw, as Obama has promised that would occur in the middle of this year? So I think that this will lead to quite an interesting debate in the United States. Al-Qaeda was always a small operation. George W. Bush, to some extent, and the Republicans had exaggerated their power and size to a degree, maybe to make an argument for war in Iraq. Quite ironically, because it was actually the war in Iraq which got Bin Laden offside with the United States. He actually wanted to attack Saddam Hussein himself, and it was the Americans going in, or the Saudis agreeing for the Americans to go into Saudi Arabia, that led to this great animosity towards the US, which really wasn't there before '91.
Remember the days when George W. Bush, for example, declared that he wanted Osama Bin Laden dead or alive? It was something that he didn't ever manage to achieve. How do you think that Barack Obama would have felt, knowing for once, he hinted at it during that address to the nation, that last week he got solid information that Osama Bin Laden was at this compound in Pakistan and he authorised this mission to try to kill or capture him?
Well, it would be, I imagine, incredibly dramatic, but it occurs at the same time as other real events go on. I think the bombing in Libya in the last couple of days, the attempt to get Gaddafi there, in some ways is a new issue and a new set of issues. So in international politics and as a US president, you can't rest on your laurels. The script is ongoing, and I think that this will be seen as maybe closing a chapter, but there are such complex chapters open in Libya, in Afghanistan, and still in Iraq to some extent.
Well, that's right. The US is still winding down operations in Iraq. It's supposed to be starting the transition in Afghanistan soon. But when you look at what Barack Obama has just announced there, some of those details are still a little curious to me. He says that there was this operation inside Pakistan and that a small team of Americans carried it out. This doesn't appear to be a bomb dropped from a drone or something like that. He said that there was a firefight, there's some sort of gun battle, and the Americans managed to kill Osama Bin Laden. So somewhere a group of Americans have come face to face with this person who's been personified as the face of terror.
And that will be an enormous story. People will be fascinated in those details. This will be a good news story for the CIA. Panetta, who's been head of the CIA, is going to be Secretary of Defense. So this will be how it will be told in America. But the complex story is, well, what about the relationship with Pakistan? How come Bin Laden was in Pakistan to begin with?
Did the Pakistanis even know that the Americans were about to carry
what was
out
their
this
intelligence?
operation?
So that complex relationship, I suppose, lies behind what will be a kind of a movie-like story of how Bin Laden was caught and chased down eventually by these US operatives.